Yay.
In development, my thing is kind of, I'm gonna hit cancel. I think my thing is running slow because I'm in the grid mode. So let me change that. All right.
Nani?
Oh,
All right. Can you guys see my screen now?
yeah.
Sir, yes, sir.
All right, let's do this. And obviously, if you have any questions, feel free to speak up. Before we get into this, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on chapter 10 only because if you follow the units compared to the chapters of our book, development's not one of the units that's going to be covered on the AP exam. But keep in mind, this unit kind of overshadows all of the units and chapters, right? I mean, we talk about development during population, we talk about development during migration, we talk about development during culture and so forth. So the reason I want to include this is because it does fall into all of the chapters in one form or another. So there's a lot of key terms in here you guys should probably be using in your free writes if there is something about development in one of the FRQs. So again, ask questions if you have any. Again, development obviously is improving the material condition of people through diffusion and knowledge. When we say materials condition, we're talking about goods, right? So obviously it's access to things like technology and education, but material goods play a role in your development as well. Automobile, infrastructure, technology to cell phones, whatever it is. So the material products, remember the magic washing machine from Hans?
Yeah.
Washing machine is a material condition. So we got to prove all that. The challenge obviously is globalization and how we do that fairly. Obviously there's going to be some income gaps, and I'll come up here shortly, but as we've become more globalized, yeah, we've incorporated a lot of these undeveloped places and helped them become more developed, but there's still a lot of gaps that we need to close, whether it's in education, whether it's in healthcare, and that's really the challenge when we get into this. All right, Q 1, why does development vary among the countries? I remember this was the categories for ranking the countries. Since they don't have wins and losses like a basketball team, we got to look at their other factors. And so that ranking system with the Human Development Index, they looked at three things: economic, social, and demographic. When we talk about economic factors, that's the income, how wealthy you are, how much money you have. Obviously, if you're making a lot of money, that's going to play a factor in the other two because you can pretty much buy the social factor. I'll ask someone from 2 White, does anyone remember what the social factor was that they looked at?
Wasn't it like how many people are in? No, that's a different one. Never mind.
Education.
Oh.
Yeah, remember, they looked at 2 things. They looked at
The literacy rate.
how many years you stay in school, how many expected years to get a decent job, and then they also look at literacy rate, how long, or if you can read at a 5th or 6th grade level. Obviously the developed countries were like 99%. LDC is obviously not quite that high. The demographic factor, does someone from 4 White know what the demographic factor was that they looked at?
Life expectancy, was it?
Yep, there you go, life expectancy. Still in 4 White, why is life expectancy such a critical statistic to look at?
It shows how good the healthcare is.
Yeah.
Yep, there you go, healthcare. And so basically to become a developed country, right, you've got to have a high income, you have to have a strong education system, and you need obviously a good healthcare system. Obviously, the better your rankings are in those 3 categories, obviously the higher you will be on those rankings. Just clarification too, when we look at per capita, there were various versions of that, but really the one we look at the most is GNI per capita. and that is gross national income per person. So we take the value of all the outputs of goods and services produced, then we just divide it by the number of people in your country. And so that value of all the output and goods in our country is, well, before the pandemic, it was $20 trillion or some crazy number like that. And we take that number and then divide it by 330 million people. And that's how you get that statistic. Our GNI per capita, give or take, is about $50,000, $55,000. Norway, who was number one in those rankings, they were up around $65,000. But they're a much smaller country, so it's a pretty misleading statistic sometimes. Here's that map of who's developed and who's not. Obviously, you want to be the red. Really not a ton of surprises on here. You definitely don't want to be, I guess that's a yellow color. That's Africa mostly. Really, the lowest countries are only in Africa, and that's really no surprise either.
Okay, Mr. Jeffrey.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, is this a global scale of analysis?
No, good question. It is not.
Okay, so this is what I was curious about. So, is the scale of analysis, do you answer based on if it's evaluating how it's evaluating each region, like based on the key, or do you answer it based on what you can see in the actual map?
Yeah, that's a good question. You're basing that off of that pop quiz I gave you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pre-quiz. It's not a grade. Usually, the answer to the question on that quiz, not always, is look for two things when you're looking for the scale of analysis, which are analyzing. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because I was going to make a separate video for that.
Okay.
But if there's borders, like you see on this map, this is going to be a national scale. So we're looking at individual countries. We look at the United States. It shows the borders, and that's a national scale that it tells us they're 0.90 and above.
So you're looking at the borders present on the map that therefore determines the scale.
Correct. A lot of times, one of those questions I think I purposely put in there, it didn't have any borders of countries, but it had a lot of shaded areas in there. So I think the answer to that one was regional.
Regional, yeah.
There was one where, like in the legend, the legend or key that most maps have, it was a county map. So that the answer to that one was local.
Local, yeah.
Because you're just looking at counties that are much more local, much smaller than the national scale, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was something we didn't really cover at the beginning of the year, and that's why I threw that up there to see how well you guys did. I haven't looked since yesterday, but no one's gotten 100% on it. But look, that's a good question. I'm glad you asked that. I'm going to put a separate video up for that and talk about that probably later this week.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay.
What if there was a map of just like one country, like the United States? Like, what would that be considered as?
That's national, I think.
National.
If there's no borders, yeah.
Okay.
But then if it's a map of the United States and they show the individual states and then all the different states have different colors based off of whatever the data is showing, that would be a state or local scale, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. The economic structure. One of the reasons I include this is because into these units, because it may be helpful to determine the types of jobs. I don't know what the questions are on the AP exam, obviously, but if you can throw these important key terms into various questions they ask. Obviously, primary, we talked about as where you're getting materials from the earth. Basically, those are two jobs. You're either a farmer or you're a miner of some sort. So those are the primary sector jobs. The secondary is manufacturing. So if you're building something with your hands, if you're making a cell phone, if you're making a computer, if you're making a television set, you're assembling it on an assembly line like that picture on the right, that is a secondary type job. And then finally, tertiary, you're selling or designing all of those things in the second sector. You design the car, you design the iPhone, you design the computer. So those are obviously the higher paying jobs. You're also involved in selling those products. So obviously of these three sectors, where do you want most of your workers?
Tertiary.
Tertiary.
Sure.
Remember, that's the highest income. And again, it kind of comes back to taxes as well. They'll pay the most taxes. Obviously, we don't want most of your workforce in the primary jobs. They're obviously not contributing much to the economy, especially since those countries that are still in those primary jobs are mostly subsistence farmers. And so there's really no income or taxes being contributed to the economy. Keys you to where inequalities in development found. This is what I was alluding to earlier. And it's not just inequalities around the world around the globe, but it's also inequalities